Hey everybody, it's Shannon from Alphatrends.net. Today's Friday, the 5th of May, 2023. Hope you had a good week for the market. It was kind of mixed, a little bit all over the place, but the NASDAQ did finish with a gain here with today's move mainly. And the biotechs, which have been the laggard this year, are finally starting to show a little bit of ability to come back from their recent declines. And Bitcoin is coming back as well. So let's take a look at some of these. Here's the S&P 500. We were on a pretty good downward trajectory until today. This is the daily chart. I thought it was highly likely that we would come down into this zone because we have this blue 50-day moving average, that red anchored volume weighted average price from that high, the green anchored VWAP from this low, and the blue year-to-date anchored VWAP. I thought, we're probably going to come down into there. Instead, we saw a gap higher, and I've been pointing out throughout the week since the Federal Reserve in the NASDAQ futures, this is what I've been using on Twitter each day, was that initially the sellers took control and came in every single time it touched the anchored volume weighted average price from the moment that the Federal Reserve announced. Well, what we saw on the last couple of attempts at that resistance was that we had higher lows. That told us the buyers were getting more impatient. The more times any level of resistance is tested, the more likely it is to fail to hold it back. This morning we had some initial volatility around the unemployment number, but that anchored volume weighted average price held as support since the Federal Reserve, and it was off to the races from there. So hopefully you had participated. And the thing about this market is you've got to be able to change your mind quickly, and that's what the case was in the NASDAQ, that it took off and really didn't look back. It made a new high, and as we often see when we have a new high, it then pulled back. And when I say often, it's that when we're extended and we see a new high, like this new high over here, or for instance, this high right here, breaking above that high, breaking above this prior high, we often see some profit taking because it's expended a lot of energy getting there. You've got to be impressed with the strength of this NASDAQ in particular. Let's look at the weekly time frame. We have higher highs and higher lows above the rising 10, 20, 30, 40-week moving average, and we're above the anchored volume weighted average price from the all-time high. To me, that's, you give the benefit of the doubt to the buyers in that instance. I was thinking we could pull back a little bit deeper, but the market had other plans, and that's why, again, you've got to be willing to listen to the market, not to what people say about the Fed or whatever. If we pull back down in towards this level next week, I think that it would be worth a purchase right over here with a stop somewhere around this level. The S&P 500 isn't as great of shape, but still in pretty impressive look to the longer term chart here. You can't deny that we are holding above the anchored volume weighted average price from the all-time high, and we now have a rising 10, 20, 30, and 40-week moving average. Those are typically what you see near the beginning of a bull run, like these ones back here. So it's impressive, but at the same time, we have the Russell 2000, which is realistically stuck in this bigger range here, and this has been kind of the midpoint of it, which is where we see those moving averages clustered together. When we look at the two time frames with the daily on the left and the 30-minute time frame on the right, we see a giant mess here in a market that says, basically just leave it alone unless you like this type of volatility where it goes from 177.5 down to 170 up to 176 down to 169. This is still a pattern of lower highs and lower lows, and it's stuck below this prior support in here, below the declining 20-day moving average, still below the anchored volume weighted average price from the low that it made this year. So, if anything, it's going to be, if it gets back above here, I don't consider that bullish. I consider it, becoming more neutral. Semiconductors bounced from their year-to-date anchored volume weighted average price, and the anchor from this low is worth considering as well because they're in the same general area. But same as the NASDAQ here. I'd like to see it pull back and then perhaps get going. We're still below the anchored volume weighted average price from this peak right here, you can see. And that tells me that it makes it more likely that the anchored VWAP from that peak will in fact provide a little bit of resistance. If we pull back, I'd like to get long here with a stop just underneath this cluster of the week-to-date volume-weighted average price, the 5-day moving average, and the anchored volume-weighted average price from this week's low will be coming up into that zone as well. Biotechs, as mentioned, they finally made it above the year-to-date anchored VWAP this week, and that was that blue line right there. And that's where the buyers took control. So as I mentioned to subscribers last night, if you were long, I thought your stop should be somewhere around this area. I would now raise it up under here. We still have an ugly picture on the weekly time frame. And this is one of those cases, if they didn't scare you out, they've been wearing a lot of people out. This is why I don't trade these time frames. Instead, I look to the shorter term time frames and look for the trends there. It's much saner. Financial stocks came back here pretty impressively today. They are still, this is what I thought might happen, and it still may. We're below the anchored volume weighted average price from this low that had been support, and we came up to it. Now, I'd be a little bit hesitant. I definitely wouldn't be a buyer in here, that's for sure. But if you're looking to sell short, I would say you have to put an anchor off of yesterday's low, and you don't want to short until it's below that. And I don't mean just drop immediately below it, but maybe something like this. And then if it were to break below somewhere right here, to get short with a stop up here or up here, that would give us the a better opportunity than if it came right down through here, not to short it there. You always have to ask yourself, where has it come from and where does your stop go? Your stop would have to be way up here, and it's more likely if it dropped down that quickly, it would bounce up a little bit. Let's talk about the Bitcoin here for a moment. This black is the anchored volume weighted average price from the all-time high. We've seen a little bit of resistance there recently, and now it seems to be bouncing. I had pointed this out on Twitter about Ethereum. Ethereum, the anchored VWAP from the all-time high is the red. We just broke back above that here today, and we broke back above the volume-weighted average price anchored to the high that it's made this year. That's after it found buyers at the anchored VWAP where it's supposed to. So this is what we call an anchored volume-weighted average pinch. It broke out of that range. The buyers are in control. I would highly expect it to run up towards this level at a minimum, and then probably up to about 2200, which is the anchored VWAP from this prior high over here. If any of these terms and the way I'm describing it don't make sense to you in terms of the anchored VWAP, you've got to get a copy of my book, Maximum Trading Gains with Anchored VWAP. Energy names got hit this week, and let's just bring that other chart back for a moment because I want to talk about crude. Crude oil also came down to a key anchored volume weighted average price from the 2020 low. You can see it hit it there, and then a couple weeks ago. Now I'm still a little bit thinking that crude is still kind of bearish, and if it rallies up towards the anchor from this low over here sometime next week, I would think that's a likely spot where it's going to find supply that's strong enough to likely become resistance, and that would not bode well, of course, for the XLE. These stocks have been finding buyers along the anchored VWAP from this low over here, so perhaps they're headed for a test in this area. This picture has changed dramatically for the energy names over the last several couple months. If we even just take a trend line, you can see we've been having trouble with that, and we have now lower highs and lower lows. So energy looks like its best days are behind it. A lot of individual stocks are starting to look like they have the potential to get up and go. CELH is finally back above the anchored VWAP from its all-time high. That means the average short seller from that peak is now losing money. The average long is making money, so that puts them in the driver's seat. We saw that with DT. Here's one on a weekly chart. You can see, it battled with that anchored VWAP over here, came down and tested it. They reported earnings this week, and the stock got going. I would be looking at DT as if it can pull back, and then you want to get it on the next move higher. Don't buy the pullback, but buy it on the next move higher with a stop below whatever the most recent relevant higher low would be, let's say right here, and then perhaps you can participate in this much bigger uptrend on the weekly time frame. FLS is a good looking one. Shake Shack breaking beyond some key anchored volume weighted average price levels, as is Shopify, SHOP. Both of those had earnings this week. Shopify is above its rising 10, 20, 30, 40 week moving average. It's above the anchored volume weighted average price from the all-time high. It's above all these key anchored VWAPs except for this one. So this is where it might encounter a little bit of hesitation in this rally, simply because it's had a great rally the last 2 days from 45 to 60 plus, so 30% in 2 days. Keep an eye on it. Don't chase, but if it can, maybe do something like this and pull back, well, an uptrend would emerge that maybe looks like this. If this is going to go back and continue higher, you want to buy in these areas, not on pullbacks and not when it's extended to new highs, but strength after a pullback is the way I always say it. Give this video a like if you liked it, share it with your friends, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Have a good weekend, and thanks for tuning in.